Most people do not lose control of their money because they are stupid. They lose control because they are living in fog. That is the first thing I want you to understand. When you cannot see what is coming in, what is going out, what is being stolen quietly, what is being saved intentionally, and what kind of life you are actually trying to build, money starts feeling like weather. You do not manage weather, you endure it. That is how millions of people live. They do not feel like the owner of their financial life. They feel like the victim of it. A bill appears, a subscription renews, a car repair lands, a card balance grows, a paycheck arrives and vanishes, a friend invites them out, a child needs something. A package shows up from something they barely remember ordering, and through all of it they keep telling themselves the same lie. The problem is that I do not make enough. Sometimes that is true. Often it is only half true, because the deeper problem is not just amount. It is blindness. A person can survive on less money than you think if the system is clear. A person can drown on more money than you think if the system is foggy. That is why I do not start with investment returns. I do not start with side hustles. I do not start with dreams of millions. I start with clarity. The source document opens in exactly the right place. 4 famous money experts are brought together, but the real common thread is not some exotic trick. It is that financial control begins the moment you stop guessing. Tiffany Aliche says you need to know where the money is going. Ramit Sethi says you need 4 numbers. Bach says the automatic economy will steal from you if you do not have a plan. Morgan Housel says if you do not define enough, you will chase money forever. That is not 4 unrelated tips. It is one system. Faithfully cite Fayturn 50 file 0 Fay, and that system is what I want to give you. Now, not as polite self-help, as a survival map, because money stress is not really a math problem at first. It is a nervous system problem. You do not know what is happening, so your brain fills the gap with fear. That is why this topic deserves a harder voice. Let me give you the master metaphor for the whole conversation. I call it the money cockpit. Imagine you are flying a plane through bad weather. You cannot see outside. The clouds are thick, the wind is moving, the ground is somewhere below you, and you are praying. Now imagine the instruments in front of you are dark. No altitude, no fuel gauge, no speed, no heading, no engine temperature, nothing. That is how most people are living with money. They are trying to survive turbulence with no working dashboard. Then they blame themselves for feeling scared. Of course you are scared. You are flying blind. The entire job of personal finance is to turn the instruments back on. That is it. Not to become a monk, not to become a genius, not to become a market wizard, to turn the instruments back on. Once you do that, life gets quieter fast. Not easy, but quieter. And that quiet is where good decisions begin. The first instrument is what I call the money mirror. The source says Tiffany Aliche starts with a very simple rule. Write down everything you spend money on, not the amounts first. Just the words, kids, credit cards, grooming, groceries, utilities, going out. Then estimate the monthly amount for each one by checking statements if needed. Then write down what comes in. Then subtract spending from income. She even calls the moment when people see the number the tears and tissue step, because that is when reality finally becomes visible. Faithful cite Fayturn 50 file 0 Fay good. That is exactly what has to happen. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. And most people are not poor at first because they lack spreadsheets. They are poor because they are emotionally avoiding the mirror. They know if they look, they may feel shame. They know if they total the subscriptions, the delivery fees, the eating out, the impulse buys, the random leaks, they may have to admit that the story they have been telling themselves is incomplete. That is why the mirror matters. Not because lists are glamorous, because truth is, a money mirror does one brutal thing. It ends mystery. Mystery is expensive. Mystery allows a person to keep saying, I don't know where it all goes. The moment you write it down, that sentence dies. And that is a good death, because it is very hard to build wealth while still speaking in fog language. The source then goes one level deeper and gives the most useful categorization in the whole section: bills, usage, bills, choices. Bills are things that will chase you if you do not pay them: rent, mortgage, debt minimums. Usage bills are the things that move based on how you use them: electricity, water, data. Then everything else is choice. That matters because now the mirror does more than reflect. It diagnoses, do you have an earning problem or a spending problem? If most of the money is going to the bills, you may need to increase income. If most is going to the choices, you may need to cut. Fay file site, fay turn, 50 file 0 fay. That is one of the smartest distinctions in the whole file, because most people collapse every problem into one sentence. I just need to make more money. Maybe, maybe not. If your choices are swallowing you alive, more income will simply feed the same leak faster. If your bills are already taking most of the oxygen, then yes, cutting your way out may be foolish and earning more becomes the sharper weapon. That is why I call it the money mirror. A real mirror does not flatter you. It shows you where you are. And if you want to get out of financial fear, that is the beginning, not inspiration visibility. The second instrument is what I call the four-bucket engine. The source says Ramit Sethi simplifies almost everything into four buckets: fixed costs, savings, investments, and guilt-free spending. Fixed costs are ideally 50 to 60% of take-home pay, savings around 5 to 10%, investments around 5 to 10%, ideally more if possible, and guilt-free spending 20 to 35%. His argument is that once you know these four numbers, you stop feeling overwhelmed, because the whole financial system becomes visible and manageable. Fay file site, fay turn 50, file 0 fay. That is correct. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs a person can have with money, because most adults treat money like one giant emotional blob: debt, bills, food, savings, stress. Everything is blended into one ugly feeling. No wonder they freeze. Ramit's buckets matter because buckets separate the flows. Once the flows are separated, you can start governing them. I have always believed that wealth is built less by obsession and more by design. Design says this much goes here, this much goes there, this much protects me, this much builds tomorrow, this much I get to enjoy without guilt. That last part is crucial. The source makes a big point of guilt-free spending, and it should, because people who do not have a category for joy often create secret joy categories anyway. They just call them mistakes later. Fay file site, fay turn 50 file 0 fay. That is a profound truth. A person who says every dollar must go to virtue usually ends up rebelling against his own life. Then he swings into a binge, then into guilt, then into shame, then back into restriction. That is not wealth. Building, that is dieting with money. I do not want dieting with money. I want a machine. A machine includes controlled pleasure. That is the brilliance of the four-bucket engine. It says your life is not only rent and retirement, your life must also include living, but living should be pre-decided, not accidental. That is the difference. A guilt-free category is not waste, it is pressure release. And pressure release matters because a person who feels chronically deprived cannot stay consistent for long. Now let me sharpen this further. Fixed costs are where many lives quietly go wrong. The source uses that bucket to include rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, debt payments, fine. But the deeper insight is this: once fixed costs get too large, the rest of life becomes defensive. That is why a beautiful apartment, expensive car, or overgrown lifestyle can quietly sabotage wealth before the person ever notices. The fixed bucket is not sexy, it is structural. Fay file site, fay turn. 50 file 0 fay savings matter because they buy time. Investments matter because they buy future leverage, guilt. Free spending matters because they buy loyalty to your own plan. That is why the four-bucket engine works. Not because it is sophisticated, because it is simple enough to obey. The third instrument is what I call the automatic river. This is where David Bach enters, and the source becomes especially useful. He says we live in an automatic economy. Either it makes you rich or it keeps you poor. He says the phone in your hand is either helping you build wealth or helping people extract it from you for life. Subscriptions, apps, delivery systems, memberships, and all the other automatic drains are designed to attach themselves to your paycheck permanently. His core rule is brutal and correct. Either you have a plan for your money, or someone else has a plan for your money. Fay file site, fay turn 50 file 0 fay. That sentence should be written on every bank statement in America because it explains the entire modern economy in one line. The economy no longer wants one purchase from you. It wants lifetime extraction. That is why the system feels so sticky. It is not just Netflix. It is the gym, the meal service, the forgotten app, the cloud storage, the premium version, the monthly boost, the yearly renewal you forgot was yearly. The economy learned a magnificent trick. Take tiny amounts automatically and make them invisible enough that the person never feels the full theft in one moment. That is the automatic river. Your money is flowing every month whether you govern the river or not. If you do not build channels, the river feeds everyone else. Machine. If you do build channels, part of that river begins feeding your own future. That is why automation matters so much. The source also pushes one of David Bach's oldest insights. Tiny amounts matter because repeated automatic movement matters. He uses the famous examples of $27.4 a day becoming $10,000 a year, and over long periods with compounding, potentially becoming very large sums. He also recommends small daily or regular savings, even $10 a day or change, rounding systems, to begin creating the habit and the flow. The main point is not the exact number. The point is that even a small automatic stream can become a wealth-building channel instead of a leak. Fay felicite, fay turn, 50 file, 0 fay. That is correct. And I want to say something important here. People often make a mistake when they hear this. They think the lesson is mainly about coffee. It is not. The lesson is about direction. If a dollar is going to move automatically every day, which side of the river is it moving to, out of your life or into your future? That is the whole thing. I do not worship penny pinching, but I deeply respect automatic direction because a person who cannot yet save much can still save in the correct direction. And direction repeated long enough becomes identity. That is why I call it the automatic river. You do not need to make each drop meaningful. You need the river itself to run where you want it to go. The fourth instrument is what I call the enough line. This is where the source becomes much more mature than most money content. Morgan Housel says people often chase money because money is measurable. It is easier to say, I want more money, than to define what a good life actually looks like. He also says many money woes are expectations problems, that people keep moving the goalpost, and that if you do not define enough for yourself, money becomes a scoreboard. You never actually win. The host then translates this into the simplest exercise in the whole piece. Finish the sentence, enough for me is fay file site, fay turn 50 file, 0 fay. That is one of the best questions anybody can ask about money. Because if you do not draw the enough line, the world will erase it for you. There's always a bigger house, a better vacation, a richer friend, a more stylish kitchen, a newer car, a larger number, a more impressive portfolio, a more luxurious school, a more expensive zip code, a more glamorous version of life. If your mind has no internal enough line, the market will keep renting your insecurity forever. That is why money alone does not calm people. People think more money will end comparison. Often it only scales comparison. The source uses Will Smith's story through Morgan Housel's frame. When he was poor, he could tell himself money would solve all his pain. Then he got rich, and the deeper pain remained, which meant the hope attached to money disappeared too. The lesson is not that money does nothing. The lesson is that money becomes a dangerous god when you ask it to fill holes. It was never designed to fill fay file site fay turn 50 file 0 fay. That matters enormously. Because if you ask money to be your self-worth, it will never be enough. If you ask money to define a good life, the goalpost will keep moving. If you ask money to prove you matter, the comparison game will never release you. The enough line is where adulthood begins. Enough for me is bills paid on time. Enough for me is no late fees. Enough for me is $1,000 in emergency savings. Enough for me is taking the kids somewhere without panic. Enough for me is ordering dinner once a week without guilt. Enough for me is putting money into retirement and sleeping well. Enough for me is a life where I no longer hide from envelopes. That is real. That is measurable. And most importantly, it is yours. The enough line is not about settling. It is about taking back authorship. Now, I want to connect these four instruments because they are much stronger together than alone. The money mirror shows you the truth. The four-bucket engine organizes the truth. The automatic river moves the truth in your favor. The enough line stops the truth from being corrupted by endless comparison. That is the real system inside the source, not four expert clips, one coherent machine. And once you see it that way, the whole subject becomes less chaotic. This is not a million separate hacks. It is visibility, allocation, automation, and definition. That is how financial control begins. The fifth mechanism is what I call identity repair. This is woven all through the source, even when it is not the official headline. Ramit says if you say, "I am bad with money," you are often choosing not to get better. Mel talks openly about her past of not opening bills, drowning in shame, and then later still not looking, even after debt was gone, because the old emotional wiring remained. Morgan says a lot of what you feel about falling behind comes from expectations. Tiffany says the money list is the first honest step. The common thread is obvious once you see it. Before money systems improve, money identity often has to improve too. Fay-file cite Fay-turn 50 file 0 Fay that matters, because a lot of adults are not really bad with money. They are bad with the emotional story they have built around money. I'm not good at math. My family was always bad with money. I'm just an overspender. I never learned this stuff. Those stories feel protective because they explain the pain. But they also keep the pain alive. Identity repair begins when you stop saying, "I am bad with money," and start saying, "I have not built the system yet." That is a radically different sentence. One is a verdict. The other is a project. I always prefer projects to verdicts. Verdicts trap you. Projects move. That is why this whole piece works so well when read correctly. It is not telling you to become a different species of human. It is telling you to become slightly more truthful, slightly more structured, slightly more automatic, and slightly less hypnotized by other people. Scoreboards. That is achievable. The sixth mechanism is what I call offense. The source says something subtle but important through both Tiffany and Ramit. Once you understand whether your real issue is spending too much or not making enough, you can finally stop flailing. If the problem is choices, cut them. If the problem is that all your money is already going to bills, then endless cutting may be the wrong battlefield and offense. Earning more, changing income, negotiating, or redesigning costs becomes much more important. Fay-file cite Fay-turn 50 file 0 Fay that is crucial, because too many people try to solve an income problem with frugality or a spending problem with fantasy raises. Offense means the diagnosis is finally clean enough that action gets targeted. If bills eat everything, your job is not to become even more saintly with groceries. Your job may be to raise income, lower housing, restructure debt, or change the game entirely. If choices eat everything, your job is not to dream about earning more while your spending machine remains broken. Your job is to stop the leak. Offense without diagnosis is chaos. Diagnosis without offense is stagnation. You need both. That is what the instrument panel gives you. The seventh mechanism is what I call patience with proof. This comes most clearly from David Bach's compounding argument and Morgan Housel's psychology. The source keeps returning to one idea. You do not need to change your entire financial life in a day. You need a repeatable action that proves you are in charge now. $1 a day, a canceled subscription, a savings app, a real money list, a defined enough line, a monthly one, HAR review. These sound small, they matter, because they turn the relationship from reactive to proactive. Fay-file cite Fay-turn 50, file 0 Fay. That is why patience matters, not because slowness is romantic, because proof beats motivation. A person who saves $1 automatically every day has more evidence than a person who declares a new financial life every Sunday night. A person who cancels 3 dead subscriptions is more in charge than a person who watches 50 hours of money, content, and changes nothing. A person who knows his 4 buckets is more powerful than the person who says, "I am just overwhelmed." Proof creates calm. Calm creates patience. Patience lets compounding do its quiet work. Now let me bring all of this together into one operating system, because the point of a good source document is not to leave you inspired. It is to leave you dangerous, I call it the money cockpit protocol. First, build the money mirror. Write every category down. Then the amounts, then income, then the truth. Second, categorize the truth bills. Usage bills, choices, or fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt, free spending. The exact labels matter less than separating the flows. Third, turn the river. Cancel the leaks you do not care about. Automate the streams you do care about. Fourth, draw the enough line before the market draws it for you. Fifth, repair the identity. Stop speaking as though your current confusion is your permanent character. Sixth, diagnose correctly. Is this mainly a spending problem or an earning problem? Seventh, pick one automatic proof move. Now today, not after you are motivated again. That is the protocol. And if you follow it, the emotional tone of your financial life changes quickly. Not because you suddenly become rich, because you stop being lost. That is a very different kind of wealth. Now let me tell you the harshest truth in the whole conversation. A lot of people do not actually want a budget. A lot of people do not actually want the four numbers. A lot of people do not actually want to define enough. Do you know why? Because fog still leaves room for fantasy. As long as you do not know the numbers, you can still imagine that one future raise or one good month or one new app or one vague change will somehow fix everything. Clarity kills fantasy. That is why people resist it. But clarity gives you something much better in return agency. The source says it beautifully in its own way near the end. The second you take one proactive step, you start feeling better because you are no longer only at the effect of your financial life, you are taking control of it. That is the actual gift. Fay file site, Fay turn 50 file 0. Fay, exactly. Money peace does not begin when the balance hits some magic number. It begins when the fog lifts enough that you trust yourself to steer. That is why I do not ask first. How much money do you have, I ask. Do you know where it is going? Do you know what enough is? Do you know which river you are feeding? Do you know whether your life is being allocated by you or by the automatic economy? Those are the real questions. And once you answer them, a lot of what used to feel impossible becomes mechanical. Not easy. Mechanical. That is what you want. Not a heroic relationship with money. A boring, honest, controlled relationship with money. That is where peace lives. So let me leave you with the cleanest version of the whole story. The best financial advice in this source is not a secret stock, a side hustle, or some clever tax trick. It is something both more modest and more powerful. Look at the truth. Split the truth into clear flows. Automate the flows that build your future. Stop asking money to define your worth. That is the whole machine. And if you do that, your life may not change overnight in outward ways. But inwardly, something very important will happen. The cockpit lights will come back on. You will know your altitude, you will know your fuel, you will know your direction. And once you know those things, you stop flying blind. That is where financial security actually begins, not in more hope, in working instruments. And if you can build those starting where you are and with what you have, then you are much closer to a rich life than most people who are still spending in fog and calling it normal.